President Obama today announced more than $4 billion in education funding that will be awarded to states on a competitive basis. But to qualify, they must pass reforms, including national standards linking teacher pay to student performance and hiring and firing of teachers outside the tenure system. As ABC's Viviana Hurtado reports, they're calling it the race to the top.
I want to thank all the
President Obama says if American students don't catch up to the world in math and science, the nation's future prosperity could be in jeopardy. He's offering a solution. Through his Race to the Top competition, states could receive a share of more than $4 billion in federal education funding.
And rather than divvying it up and handing it out, we are letting states and school districts compete for it. That's how we can incentivize excellence and spur reform and launch a race to the top in America's public schools.
The grants will go out early next year. They're designed to force schools to adopt major changes, including national standards linking teacher pay to student performance and, if necessary, hiring and firing teachers regardless of tenure. Limits on the number of charter schools would be lifted.
But we have no choice. And I'm absolutely confident that we can make it happen.
A representative from the National Teachers Association says additional funding is just a small part of what's needed to turn around America's failing schools.
And I'm just a firm believer that if you don't have management, you don't have the government entity that funds it, and the employees in their union, it's not going to work.
The president said by accepting this challenge, students and teachers will have an historic opportunity to help the nation solve its problems. These include finding new sources of energy and helping to overhaul the healthcare system. Viviana Hurtado, ABC News, Washington.
The U.S. Department of Education says enrollment at public schools is growing at record rates. As of last fall, more than 49 million students attended public elementary and secondary schools. Public schools employ more than 3 million teachers with a pupil-to-teacher ratio of 15.3%, or 15.3. There are 14,000 public school districts in the U.S. holding 97,000 schools. Last year's national expenditures for those schools added up to $519 billion. And there's a new report out from the federal government's watchdog offering both praise and criticism for D.C. public schools. The report from the Government Accountability Office praised Mayor Fenty and schools Chancellor Michelle Rhee's efforts to close under-enrolled schools and improve test scores. The report also showed some concerns that, quote, some false steps had interfered with efforts to improve the system. Joining me now live with more on the president's efforts to improve the nation's schools is Jeannie Allen. She is president of the Center for Education Reform. Jeannie, great to see you. Thanks for coming in on this Friday. So what do you think of the president's race to the top? Is this kind of incentive funding a good idea?
Well, it's a great start because, as he said, there's a lot more than money to actually get us to where we need to be. What we need to do, frankly, is challenge states to do bigger and better things. And this is the Innovation Fund. And this basically says to states, if you are not doing something to make sure great teachers are rewarded and we're getting rid of people who no longer belong in the classroom, if you're not adopting high standards, not actually national standards, if you don't have great charter laws where you're actually offering and encouraging these schools to thrive and good data so parents can make fundamental choices, then you don't qualify. And those are the key pillars of what we call great education reform. And it has to start in Washington, but it has to be actualized in the states with their own effort and their own money.
This morning in the Washington Post, the president said that he's not willing to keep providing money for practices that don't work and you don't get any better results. How are teachers likely to react to this? Because there's been a little push and pull from some of the teachers' unions about some of the changes the president wants to make.
Right. Well, what's historic about this is for the first time probably for generations, we have the most tremendous bipartisan mixed support from all corners of America for real reform, right? We talked about money for a long time, but you just look at the stats you just quoted about how much we're spending, and yet we're still barely teaching kids in some of our worst off areas and even some of our better areas how to do well. What the teachers unions unfortunately are doing is they're standing in the way. Teachers, rank and file, principals, parents, many administrators absolutely support the reforms, teacher performance pay and charter schools, but the unions are having a really hard time getting rid of tradition and realizing that it's time for them to reform so they can be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem.
Is the pressure on teachers to perform a good thing if they know at the end of the day, if the more they teach, the better they do their jobs, the more money they're going to get?
Well, what great teachers tell us all the time is they love what they're doing and they believe in rewards, and they just need everyone to give them as much flexibility as possible. They love this kind of incentive and challenge. It's what they do with their kids. And so Maryland and Virginia have to get on the wagon because they're having real difficulty with these issues. They may not qualify. D.C. may actually be ahead of our two neighbors in this race to the top.
Very interesting. Jeannie Allen, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate your perspective.